Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait for just a few moments for a few more participants to join us before we start our program. Welcome this afternoon to the fourth presentation in the library's series of art talks for this season. My name is Laurie McGavin Bachman, and I organize the art talks here at the library, where we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of this series. Our art talk series is dedicated to exploring the creative process through lectures, films, and workshops that focus on art, architecture, and design. We are pleased to present this art talk today with our co-sponsor, the Ridgefield Guild of Artists. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A opportunity with our speaker, Michael Gitlitz, so you can also enter questions throughout the program if you prefer. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Michael Gitlitz, Executive Director of the Katonah Museum of Art, who will discuss how KMA and his vision are driven by a desire to create connections within communities with the intention of creating transcendence through art for all ages. In addition, he will touch upon how the museum has remained vital through artists and scholars talks and virtual exhibitions. Michael received a postgraduate diploma in the Fine and Decorative Arts from the Sotheby's Institute in London and has worked with important galleries in New York, such as Herschel and Adler Modern and the Marlborough Gallery. Before assuming his role as executive director at the KMA, he oversees an active schedule of exhibitions of art from every culture and period, a robust educational program, and a wide range of activities and events. Will you please welcome Michael Gitlitz?
Thank you, Laurie, for that very kind introduction. I'd like to thank you as well as Leslie Lampton and the Ridgefield Library and Guild of Artists for inviting me to participate in this Art Talks series. And I am honored to be among the company of Art Talk speakers such as Clara Nguyen, David Dunlop, Sabrina Marsalisi, and Peter Bachman, among other luminaries. So as Laurie mentioned, I will briefly touch on the history of the KMA, its mission, and its architecture before discussing several exhibitions of note from its past, present, and future. And finally, I'll talk about how the museum's history and mission align with my own vision to create experiences of transcendence through art. The KMA began in June 1954 as the Katonah Gallery, which was in a space on the top floor of the Katonah Village Library. And so I think that we definitely have a reason to be collaborative with the Ridgefield Library because that's where we began, in a library. And it was the brainchild of Katonah resident Inge Jensen Broward, and was a very modest space with one gallery, but it had a grand ambition from the very beginning. The ambition was to show important original works of art to the community. And from the very beginning, the mission of the Katonah Gallery was, and it still is, to promote the understanding and enjoyment of the visual arts for diverse audiences by presenting exhibitions that explore ideas about art, culture, and society, past and present, through innovative exhibition and education programs. So not a modest or at all myopic focus. It's quite grand and quite broad. And yet, as I'll discuss, this mission, this ambitious mission, is in fact a very similar idea to what's motivated me for my entire adult life, which is the creation, exploration, and presentation of art to create transcendence. It wasn't long before this fledgling gallery attracted the attention and support of a group of like-minded, exceptional people, mainly women. And this group began the culture of volunteerism and scholarship, which remains deep in the fabric of the museum's DNA today. They acted, this is in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they acted as curators, registrars, installers, marketers, designers, transporters, security guards, and all the myriad roles that have now become professionalized, even in quite small museums today. I would be remiss if I did not point out the courage and vision of these early supporters, who would, through their expertise and their force of will, borrow the most important works of art from the most important artists, private collections, and museums. There was a time when a few of these intrepid volunteers obtained the loan of an important work from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they drove down to pick it up in their own VW microbus. And they did make it back to the KMA without any damage, but a slight delay in that the bus was broken down on the West Side Highway. So things have changed slightly. One can no longer pull up to the Met in your own station wagon and check a box and take a work of art. But this sort of ambitious, volunteer-based can-do attitude really is still today part of what the KMA is. So early on, the decision was made to establish the Katonah Gallery as a Kunsthalle. And for anyone who is unfamiliar, that is a non-collecting institution without a permanent collection. And they did this in order to create a dynamic and flexible exhibition program, something which we benefit from today. And this structure has remained one of the Katonah Museum of Art's unique and great strengths. It allows the museum to present exhibitions and programs that range from ancient to contemporary art and from regions all over the world, something which would be very difficult for a small museum art size if we did have a permanent collection. The Katonah Gallery almost immediately began to mount a series of very important and serious exhibitions. And just to name a few, they included watercolors from the Whitney Museum's collection, 3 architects, Barnes, Keisler, and Pei, Ancient Art of the Americas, Treasures of Pre-Columbian Art, Art of India, Alfred Stieglitz and his Circle, Alexander Calder, Milton Avery, Medieval Images, a glimpse into the symbolism and reality of the Middle Ages, Ellsworth Kelly, and Fairfield Porter, among many, many other exhibitions. These exhibitions were sophisticated. They emphasized education, and they were far ahead of their curve, many times showing artists or ideas that had not previously been shown in any other institutions. I'm proud to say that this tradition has continued until the present day. Fast forward to 1986, when the Katonah Gallery launched its first capital campaign. And it selected the renowned architect, Edward Larrabee Barnes, and began construction on a new museum. Barnes was an architect of extraordinary talent and courage. Having studied under Walter Gropius and Marcel Breuer, he designed important private and public buildings, including the Dallas Museum of Art, the Walker Art Center, and the iconic IBM building in Manhattan. The new KMA building, with 4 gallery spaces, offices, and a large sculpture garden and campus, opened on November 2nd, 1990. Designer Ivan Chermayeff used Barnes' distinctive oversized diamond and square windows to create from the west facade the KMA's well-known logo, which is still in use 40 years later. And it was at this time that the Katonah Gallery, now rechristened the Katonah Museum of Art, began the process of creating a full-time professional staff, while at the same time retaining the strong tradition of volunteerism that had nurtured the Katonah Gallery for 36 years. So this marriage of a highly skilled and experienced professional staff with knowledgeable and committed volunteers and supporters has remained one of the unique aspects and one of the strongest aspects of the KMA. In its new building, the KMA continued to mount groundbreaking and innovative exhibitions such as Jacob Lawrence, The Early Decades, Frederick E. Church, Under Changing Skies, oil sketchings and drawings from the collection of the Cooper Hewitt National Museum of Design, Smithsonian Institution, and Shattering Glass, New Perspectives. In recent years, the KMA has presented innovative exhibitions which have garnered international attention, such as Long Winding Journeys, Contemporary Art and the Islamic Tradition, which presented contemporary work by Muslim artists from all over the world. The Edge Effect, the KMA's first international juried biennial, which for the first time extended its focus and received submissions from all over the North and South American continents, from Europe and from as far away as Beijing and Karachi. Sparkling Amazons, Abstract Expressionist Women of the 19th Street Show, for which we were able, for the first time anywhere, to present the women who helped create the New York School of Abstract Expressionism, and specifically at this pivotal exhibition in 1951. While we were able to show masterpieces by Mitchell and Elaine de Kooning, as well as the Whitney's iconic and monumental painting by Lee Krasner, The Seasons, we also were able to show completely forgotten artists and works by artists like Day Schnabel and Marguerite Guitou-Knoop. Just this summer and fall, we presented the first exhibition, solo exhibition, of the work of Bisa Butler, one of the most important emerging contemporary African-American artists. And this exhibition just went to the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was a very powerful exhibition. I hope that some of you got a chance to see it. And it was followed by our current exhibition, which we have up, called Hands and Earth, which is perspectives on Japanese contemporary ceramics. This is a selection of work from one of the most important collections of Japanese contemporary ceramics by Jeffrey and Carol Horvitz in the entire world outside of Japan. And it's the first time it's been shown in any museum in New York State. So we feel very proud of that. At the same time, we are showing work by Mark Rothko. And what we did was we created an entire room within one of our galleries so that we could showcase one masterpiece by Rothko and allow people to have a real contemplative experience. Rothko, during his life, had an idea of making small single work chapels along the sides of highways that people could rest and recharge spiritually and then drive on to the next one. Well, the project was never realized, and most Rothkos are experienced side by side with other paintings, either by the artist or by other artists. So it is very rare to have an opportunity to sit and view a single work without any distractions whatsoever. And this Rothko room that we've created allows one to do that. The success of these innovative exhibitions and educational programs were validated for us, not just through attendance and feedback of our community, but also from recognition in both regional and international press. And this included, just within the last year, the New York Times, the Smithsonian Magazine, the Financial Times of London, and the Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. So we feel very proud of the fact that the museum is now reaching well beyond our local footprint. And I know all of us have struggled under this pandemic with the restrictions that we've had to suffer. And we too had to close our museum in mid-March, and we were able to open it again in late July. And subsequent to that, we've had time-ticketed entry, and it's been an opportunity for us to allow people to come in and have a more personal, intimate relationship with the work. So we plan to continue that approach with our spring exhibitions. We will have 2 new Rothko works in the Rothko room. And in our main galleries, we will be showing an exhibition called Still Live, which explores contemporary artists' use of new media to re-examine the traditional genre of the still life. So if you take this very old, staid genre of still life and imagine artists using stop action photography or video, light boxes, and all sorts of other new media to reinvent the genre, you will understand this is a really interesting and fun exhibition. We will have the Rothko room at the same time, and then in our small gallery, we will have the work and installation by Beatrice Schiaccia called My Hope Chest. And that will be a single artist, single work installation, which I think is always an interesting thing to see when you experience a contemporary artist's pure vision. In the fall, we will be mounting an exhibition called Arrivals. And this will focus on changing artistic responses over 500 years to multiple waves of immigration to America and the myths of American identity that have defined our sense of who we are as Americans. We have a powerful education program that is planned to accompany this very powerful curatorial exhibition. And we are extending our curatorial program well into 2023 and looking beyond that now. So to turn to the more personal, as I alluded to at the beginning of my introduction, I've had a lifelong interest in the power of art to create experiences of transcendence. This fascination for me began with my first combined philosophy and art history paper at the age of 16, in which I explored the relationship between the aesthetic experience and awe that we find in 3 main areas: in religious practice, in nature, and in art. I had ample experience with all 3. I grew up in a traditional practicing Jewish house while attending Catholic schools and with parents who had practices in Catholic hospitals. So my bar mitzvah was a sea of nuns. I understood the power of prayer to transcend one's individual earthly concerns, and it was a palpable reality in my mind. I also grew up in a camping and hiking family, and after reading Thoreau and Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, I began to relate to the notion of finding a greater power, a transcendent force within the magic and mystery of nature. And finally, after beginning to study art history in my senior year of high school, I was immediately struck by artists' use of an artist's arsenal of techniques to bring those moments of religious ecstasy and the power of the natural world and abstract form to create the aesthetic experience, that moment of transcendence. This is the moment when we as individual human beings are elevated beyond ourselves to feel a sense of belonging with others, with our community, with the human race, and with the world. Once one has experienced that moment of transcendence in art, it is something which one will pursue for the rest of one's life. Like a first-time golfer who magically hits a 400-yard drive, which they have no idea how they did, but have a burning desire to recreate that feeling again for the rest of their lives. And I imagine this is why millions of people spend countless hours in silly clothes, no offense to you golfers out there, slogging through miles of grass, fields, sand, and water. I myself, dumbstruck by the work of Correggio and Caravaggio, the Parthenon frieze, the Veronese paintings, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, Joan Mitchell, and even Gia Bologna's little-known bronze of a turkey in the Florence's Bargello Museum. All these things have moved me to pursue finding and sharing those moments of transcendence. I've looked for and treasured those moments throughout almost 30 years of dealing in art throughout the world. But joining the Katonah Museum of Art as executive director in 2018 and seeing the reaction of visitors, both young and old, to the museum's powerful exhibitions and innovative education programs, this pursuit was revived and reinforced. The importance of trying to create and share those transcendent experiences through art became even more personal and visceral. But it was at the KMA June 2019 gala when our president of the Board of Trustees, Debbie Mullen, made the theme of her speech Moments of Transcendence, that I became emboldened to speak about this and to think about this anew. She elegantly articulated the transcendence experienced in the joyful faces of school children, grappling with new ideas and images, in the proud families poring over the talented work in our young artists exhibitions, and in the shared vision of artists, curators, and docents bringing visitors into an understanding and appreciation for art and ideas. These moments of transcendence, whether experienced by a child or an adult, in an exhibition, in our learning center, or at an artist talk, they are the 400-yard drive that we all seek. They are what give our lives meaning, purpose, and bring us together as a community. I hope that all of you have either experienced these moments of transcendence in art or are actively seeking them. Because going to a small, intimate museum like the Katonah Museum of Art or the gem of the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art are just two places where one can really find that experience and share it with your family and with your friends. And I think we're very, very lucky to live in a community where we have these kinds of treasures so close to us. It's easy to take for granted, but there was a time this summer for several months when all the cultural institutions in New York City were closed. And people were coming up here to get their aesthetic fix, their fix of transcendence. And it was wonderful to see people coming from far afield. We now have, because of our virtual programming, followers in Italy and Brazil and all over the world. And I think the silver lining to this pandemic has been that it's brought people together from a much, much wider place. And so that's an opportunity for all of us to share our transcendent experiences with others. I foreshortened my talk because I really would love to open the floor up to people to have questions to ask me about either my experiences or the Katonah Museum of Art, its history, our exhibitions, our education programs. I am open to any questions whatsoever. And again, thank you so much for attending this talk.
If there's any questions that anyone would like to raise with Michael, please put it in the Q&A and we will forward them to him. Michael, I have a question for you.
Of course.
Do you compare your work in the city, working in galleries, compared to your work as a museum director up here in Katonah?
That's a great question. I think both the world of museums and the world, the commercial art world, are somewhat opaque. Very opaque when compared to a lot of other fields, although I think that's changed a lot with the rise of the internet over the last 20 years. But one of the things that I can say with increasing certitude is that there is a continuum. It's an ecosystem in which the artist and the gallerist and the curator and the collector and ultimately the visitor plays an important role. And so there are many works of art, and I certainly enjoyed doing this early on in my career, they're works of art that get discovered in somebody's attic and they're unattributed and dirty. And you have the opportunity as an art dealer to do serious research and rediscover, reattribute the work, oversee its careful conservation, and then bring it to the attention either of the public or of a museum. And that's one part of the life cycle. We've also now gotten to this point, I think, in the last several years where the idea of deaccessioning among museums is no longer a dirty word. And so museums have always bought and sold works of art. They're just doing it a little more openly now than they used to. So in the commercial art world, you find incredibly smart, ambitious, erudite people who love art, just as you do in the museum world. I think one of the main differences, Lori, is that, in the commercial art world, at the end of the day, it is commercial. It is an art market. And so every transaction has a layer of the commercial in it, no matter how much one is in love with a work of art or an artist. In the museum world, I think that every interaction is infused with a purely altruistic motivation, which I find incredibly rewarding and motivating. I do think there's that difference, but as most people know, there are galleries out there that are putting on absolutely museum quality exhibitions. And I think it's worth noting.
Good. We have a couple other questions for you. Somebody would like to know a little bit more about Bisa Butler. If you could talk about her work.
Sure. Bisa Butler is an artist that I discovered at around the same time as a curator of textiles at the Art Institute of Chicago named Erica Warren. I was down in Miami for Art Basel Miami Beach. And for anyone who's been in that circus-like atmosphere or hasn't, it is a series of dozens and dozens of art fairs that surround the central art fair called Art Basel Miami Beach, at which there are hundreds of galleries at each art fair and dozens and dozens of artists being shown at each gallery. So you have hundreds of thousands of works that are being shown at the same time. And people begin to have that kind of 1,000-yard stare, that zombie-like look after the third day in their 10th art fair they've gone through. And I was on my way out. It was the last art fair I was looking at, and I saw a work in the booth of Claire Oliver, who is a gallerist who is now in Harlem. And this work I showed earlier called the Safety Patrol, and I'll just scroll back up to it, immediately caught my attention. And upon closer inspection, I was just astounded that the work was not a painting as I thought it would be. Here's the work, the safety patrol. And it's quite large. It's 7 by 8 feet, but it is a quilt upon which are appliqued pieces of fabric that are mainly textiles from Ghanaian and West African origin. Bisa Butler herself was born and raised in New Jersey, but her family is from Ghana. And she has created a body of work that are portraits using oftentimes old photographs, sometimes anonymous photographs, sometimes by very important WPA photographers, to reinvent these figures and give them new life. And I think her work is just extraordinarily powerful. Anyway, I brought this back and showed our curator an image of her work, and she got very excited and got in touch with the Art Institute of Chicago, asking if we could borrow this work, which we learned they just acquired. And they said, well, no, we have a very long acquisition process and we couldn't possibly. And before very long, we were contacted again, and they said, yes, we will loan the work. Would you consider sending the exhibition to us afterwards? And for a museum like the Katonah Museum of Art to organize an exhibition with the Art Institute of Chicago, with their, just powerhouse of scholarship, was very humbling and very fortunate. So Bisa Butler, I think everyone should watch out for. She will be in every major museum collection within the decade.
She works mostly in paint and fabric. Is that her material?
She really works almost exclusively in fabric. And you might look at a piece and look at a face and say, well, that's got to be painted. But no, if you look at it up close, it's hundreds of pieces of fabric that are appliqued. But she started out as a painter, and so she understands how to construct volume using tone, and she understands techniques that painters use, chiaroscuro and contrasting certain colors. So I think she's coming at a place where she's really combining all of the skills of great quilt making with someone who is a master in painting as well.
Okay. Somebody was wondering that you had a number of trips to other galleries and museums, and you're thinking about bringing that back post-COVID.
Yes, I think that's one of the more fun things that we get to do. And I did one a couple of months ago. And of course, we're much more limited now in the number of people who can participate in those trips, but we will continue, and we hope to do one in this area coming up in March, and then another one in June to Yale, to the Yale University Art Gallery, the Center for British Art, and Nexium. And these trips are fun. We stop for lunch, and it's a chance to really talk with people about what you're seeing. It really builds a certain camaraderie with your group. And I hope to do longer trips when this pandemic is behind us, where we can travel farther afield and do overnights or even longer trips. The KMA has had trips over the years to Cuba, to Japan, to Iceland, all over the world. So I would hope to do that as well.
Fantastic. Very quick question. Was Arrivals in 2020 or is it coming in 2021?
So that's a great question. It was originally scheduled to open in October of 2020. And because of the pandemic, the Katonah Museum of Art and every other museum in the world had to, with very little notice, rethink their program. And we were very fortunate to be able to find two wonderful exhibitions for this 2021 season. so that we were able to push our entire program back by 1 year, such that starting at the end of June will be our second jury exhibition. And then in October, we will finally open Arrivals.
Okay. I've got another question here. Why does having a permanent collection preclude the Kunsthalle approach?
Well, if you have a collection of art, you are really beholden to show it at some point or another. That doesn't mean that one has to show nothing but that. But I don't know if anyone saw that really interesting article in the New York Times about a year ago, where they showed on a bar graph the percentage of works in the average large museum's collection that they're able to show at any one time. And it is down in the low single digits, and sometimes it's a fraction of a percent. With the Kunsthalle, we don't have to do that. Now, we don't have that wonderful gift of having works that we can pull out and show, but because there's so many works of art and real masterpieces in other museums that aren't being shown, we have no shortage of great masterpieces to put into our exhibitions. It's a different kind of an animal, and I think sometimes our approaches to exhibitions overlap, and sometimes they're very different.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the virtual programming at the KMA?
Sure. Like many institutions, and I'm sure many of you in the audience, we had to adjust to this brave new virtual world. And our phenomenal education department, we have a really robust group of volunteers that ranges between 70 and 100 people, began to put together virtual docent tours of our exhibitions using Zoom and webinars like this, where they were able to explore an exhibition and sometimes delve deeply into a very specific part of an exhibition. Because as you might imagine, each one of these exhibitions could generate dozens of different talks. And so we have had a pretty robust program of that. And we've been gratified that, in the past, if we got 15 or 20 people, we really couldn't accommodate more than that in the museum pre-COVID. Whereas now it has not at all been unusual to see 50, 60, 70 people in a virtual tour. And I think that's the case with your Ridgefield Art Talks as well.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, we are able to have artist talks. Bisa Butler and I had 2 wonderful conversations about her work that were virtual. And if we'd done it in the museum, we would have had a maximum capacity of about 60 people. We had in each one of her talks over 300 people.
Wow.
So that's the silver lining of going virtual, that we're able to really expand our footprint.
Fantastic. Somebody's asking here if you can please give an explicit example of a work of art that inspired Transcendence for you. And if you could please provide a detailed description of something that really inspired you.
Okay. In the early 1530s in Urbino, there was an Italian artist. Well, there was no such thing as Italy then, but there was an artist from Urbino named Correggio. And he made a series of paintings of the loves of Jupiter. And as some of you may know, Jupiter in mythology comes down in various forms to seduce and take away various humans, nymphs. So he comes down in one form as a shower of gold for Danae, and in one form as a swan. You've all heard of Leeda and the Swan. And Correggio did a series of these paintings, and 2 of them are in the Kunsthistorische in Vienna. And they're vertical paintings, and one is of Jupiter and Io, and she was a beautiful young woman, and Jupiter came down in the form of a cloud, and Correggio paints her, and she's just, her corporeality is so evident. He's really a genius of the High Renaissance, painting a very fleshy and realistic figure, and yet you're seeing a cloud with a hand and a face emerging from it that seems just as powerful. And so there's this dynamic between the physical world and the world of the spirit that is made plain. And then in the other painting that's in the same collection, of all Jupiter's loves, there was actually one that was male, Ganymede, if anyone's heard of him. Jupiter comes down in the form of an eagle, and he whisks Ganymede, a young shepherd boy, up into Olympus, and Ganymede becomes the cupbearer of the gods. And Correggio painted this figure, this beautiful, beautiful young man being carried away by an eagle in this sort of vortex, this corkscrew-like fashion, moving upward, somewhat similar to the Veronese in Venice of the Assumption of Mary. And it was so dynamic. And these are works that just floored me, that absolutely laid me flat. I can say the same thing about the first time I saw the Jericho Raft to the Medusa, or the Winged Victory of Samothrace, or the first time I saw the Parthenon. There's so many works out there. And I could say the same thing about contemporary works too. The first time I saw Chuck Close, I had that feeling. So sorry, you asked for one example, and I think I just gave you half
it. Somebody wants to know if any of the artists or scholars talks that you've mentioned have been recorded and are available.
So we have recorded some of them, and we can make some available and are planning to. It's a little bit difficult sometimes because we need to do some editing, and that's very time consuming. But also because we have to host offsite given our rather archaic website. Now we're building a new website, which we hope to have live by this summer. And we hope then to be able to host many more of these past virtual talks and discussions.
Okay, are there any more questions? I'm trying to see if there's any additional questions that are coming up.
Well, while you're looking for them, I just want to say that you know, talking about experience, transcendence, and community, and this may be a little bit more controversial, but I really believe that one has to transgress slightly to achieve transcendence. Now, when I was a kid, I used to sneak into our local museum, the Roberson Museum in Binghamton, New York, where I grew up, and I would spend hours there after school. And it was a place where I could just lose myself, but I wasn't supposed to be there. And that made it all the more interesting and all the more fun. And I have to say, one of my great pleasures has been, and I miss this post-COVID, busloads of children pulling up to the museum, the doors open, and you hear this incredible level of excitement and the chatter. And then you always hear an adult or two saying, shh, you've got to be quiet. And I always hope inwardly that they disobey and that they continue to express their enthusiasm and their emotions and their connection with the work in every way they possibly can, short of putting a finger through a painting. Anyway, the danger of the works usually come from the adults, not the children. But
do you have students coming from every level to the museum?
We do. We have stroller tours, and we have all sorts of programs for kids in every age group up to the Young Artists Exhibition, which are all seniors. We have a teen council where students from 10th, 11th, and 12th grade actually work on curating and installing exhibitions. It's a little hard. We kind of lose people in their 20s. You know, they go off to college and sort of disappear. And I've spoken to a lot of museum directors, and they say the same thing. You know, they become this lost demographic, which we hope will come back. Now, during COVID, we're seeing a lot more of them. A lot more, you know, people are studying from home. But we do interact with students of every age.
That's fantastic. That's great. Well, I've opened the floor to any other additional questions or anything in chat. I know that there was a link to a couple of the paintings that you mentioned in the chat section, if people would like to check that out.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm happy to scroll back through any of the slides if people had questions. The one thing that I want to emphasize is, you know, I'm very proud of our exhibitions, both current and the ones coming up. But what I really do think is unique is this Rothko room, which we've built. And, you know, we live in an age where we've been so trained by screens and apps to filter through, to experience, absorb, and then move on from hundreds of images per minute. And that process has really moved into our daily lives in such a way that people move through an exhibition and they might spend 5 or 10 seconds looking at a work of art, and most of that's looking at the label. So going into a room where you have a single work of art and you have a bench that is designed to accommodate one or at most two people, it forces you to sit down for several minutes, hopefully 5 or 10 minutes, and really, really just look. And that is the kind of experience which engenders, I think, the transcendent experience almost more than anything. And this goes to, even if you're in a large museum, I always encourage people, don't try to see an entire collection. Don't try to see an entire artist's work. Don't even try to see one room. You can either decide, I'm only going to look at 10 works of art in this entire museum, but I'm going to spend 10 minutes on each of them. Or let yourself wander. And if you get drawn to a work of art, stop. It's very hard to do. It's harder than it sounds at first glance. But slowing down is important.
Here's another question. Do you make studio visits with contemporary artists?
So in the past, both I and our curatorial staff have done what we call one-on-ones, where we will meet with a group of artists, but singly, a selection of artists that are members of the Katonah Museum Artists Association. One of our great strengths is that we have an affiliate group, the Katonah Museum Artists Association, with several hundred members. And one of the things that I enjoy so much is having the opportunity to sit down for 15, 20 minutes with an artist and talk about whatever they want to talk about. It could be their work, it could be marketing their work, it could be a number of things. And that is something that I think I'll continue to do. I don't, as a rule, pay studio visits to artists' studios, that are solicited. And if I did, that's all I would be doing. It would take over my entire life. Not that wouldn't be enjoyable. I love to go to artist studios, and I learn so much by just talking with artists. But it can't be part of my regular practice here.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps up the questions that we have so far. This has been a wonderful presentation, Michael. I hope everyone makes every effort to come to the KMA and see these new exhibitions coming up, and the current Rothko meditation room, as you mentioned, and arrivals. I think that sounds like a very exciting exhibition as well.
Please do, and come enjoy our sculpture garden, which is also just a wonderful, wonderful place with over 100-year-old Norway spruce trees and a rotating program of sculptures. And by the way, on the note of visiting artist studios, I strongly encourage anyone who is visiting museums, see if you can rope an artist friend into visiting with you. It's one of the best experiences you can have, is to view works of art through the lens of an artist. So try that on for size.
That sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much, Lori.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a wonderful presentation, as I mentioned. I'd also like to thank the library for its support for our Art Talk series and extend a special thank you once again to our co-sponsor, the Ridgefield Guild of Artists. Our next Art Talk will take place on Sunday, February 7th at 2 o'clock, and it will feature Stephanie Sparling Williams, an associate curator at the Mount Holyoke Museum of Art. Her talk is entitled African American Artists, Self-Determination and Resistance from the Roaring 20s to 2020. Thank you for attending our Art Talk today, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thanks again.